July 17, 1944. A chalk hillside above the village of Wissens in occupied northern France. A German artillery officer named Walter Dornberger stands at the edge of an enormous concrete dome and stares at the ground around it. The dome is the thing he has staked his reputation on. It is roughly 5 meters of solid reinforced concrete, 71 meters across, a roof so thick that no bomb in any enemy arsenal was ever supposed to crack it. Beneath it, German engineers are carving tunnels to launch the V-2 rocket at London. Dornberger has been promised this site is invulnerable, and by every rule of engineering he was taught it should be. What he's looking at does not fit those rules. The dome itself is barely scratched, but the hillside underneath it is sliding away. The chalk all around the structure has been so violently churned and shattered that the earth itself is collapsing. Tunnels are caving, galleries are filling with rubble, the ground is failing from below, and the great dome that no bomb could pierce is being quietly strangled by the destruction of everything holding it up. Dornberger writes in a report that the whole area has been so battered that it cannot be approached, and that the bunker is now threatened from underneath. He is asking the wrong question. He is asking how to repair the hillside. The question he should be asking is simpler and far more disturbing. What kind of bomb destroys a fortress without ever hitting it? That is the question this story turns on, because the British had not built a bigger version of an ordinary bomb. They had built something that worked on a principle the German fortress engineers had never designed against. And by the time men like Dornberger understood what was happening to them, the most heavily protected structures of the Third Reich, the submarine pens, the rocket bunkers, the great railway viaducts, the battleship tier pits, were already being torn apart from the inside. This is the story of how one British engineer beat reinforced concrete not by punching through it, but by attacking the earth beneath it, and of how the men who built the thickest walls in history were defeated by a weapon designed on purpose to miss. To understand it, we have to go back, not to the bomb, but to the man, and to an idea he had written down years before anyone would listen. His name was Barnes Wallis. By the start of the war, he was already one of Britain's most original engineers. He had designed the structure of the R-100 airship. He had given the Wellington bomber its remarkable geodetic airframe, a basket weave of metal that could absorb terrible punishment and keep flying. And in 1943 he had designed the bouncing bomb that breached the German dams in the Ruhr Valley, the raid that made his name a legend. But the dams raid was not the idea he cared about most. The idea he cared about most was something he had set down on paper in 1940. Wallis had been thinking about how you destroy the hardest targets a nation can build. Bridges, tunnels, dams, bunkers. His insight was about physics. A shockwave loses most of its energy very quickly when it travels through air, but a shockwave travelling through solid ground keeps its force over a far greater distance. So a bomb that simply exploded against a target on the surface was wasting most of its power into the open sky. But a bomb that buried itself deep into the earth first and only then detonated would transmit a violent shock straight into the foundations of whatever stood above. It would not need a direct hit. It could shake a structure off its footings. It could carve out a hidden cavern underground and let the target collapse into the hole. Wallis called it the earthquake principle. There was one problem. To do it properly, he wanted a 10-ton bomb dropped from 40,000 feet and an enormous aircraft built specially to carry it. The Air Ministry refused. They thought a single bomb aircraft was absurd, and for 2 years the idea sat unwanted in a drawer. What rescued it was compromise. Wallis scaled the concept down to a weapon the existing Lancaster bomber could actually lift. The result, in 1944, was a bomb officially listed as the 12,000-pound medium-capacity bomb. Everyone came to know it by a different name, the Tall Boy. The Tall Boy weighed 12,000 pounds and stood 21 feet long, but its power was not really about size, it was about precision and shape. The casing was cast from high tensile steel with a hardened, perfectly machined nose, so that it would survive the impact and keep going rather than shatter. The body was a flawless aerodynamic teardrop, and the tail fins were given a slight twist, so that as the bomb fell it began to spin like a rifle bullet. That spin held it dead straight. Dropped from around 18,000 feet, it struck the ground at close to 750 miles per hour, near the speed of a sound, and bored down as deep as 80 feet before the Torpex filling detonated. The crater it left could swallow a house. Here I have to stop and kill a myth, because this story is only worth telling if it is true. You will often hear that the tallboy was supersonic, that it broke the sound barrier on the way down. It almost certainly did not. From the heights a Lancaster could reach, it struck at high speed but generally just below the speed of sound. Wallace calculated it could go supersonic only from around 40,000 feet, an altitude no bomber of the day could manage with that load. So the truth is more modest and more interesting. It was not the speed that beat the concrete. It was the idea, and the idea needed men who could deliver it with almost impossible accuracy. A bomb that works by burrowing close to a target is useless if it lands in the next field. So the tallboy was handed to a single specialist unit, number 617 Squadron, the same men who had breached the dams flying alongside number 9 Squadron. They used a precision instrument called the Stabilizing Automatic Bomb Sight, which demanded a long, straight nerve-shredding run over the target while the aimer fed in wind and temperature. Their leader, Wing Commander Leonard Cheshire, perfected a technique of diving low to mark the aiming point by eye, sometimes from only a few hundred feet under fire. The results were staggering for the time. 617 Squadron could place these bombs within around 90 yards of the target on average. Some crews came down within 40. No air force on Earth was bombing with that kind of care. The first time they used it told them everything. On the night of June 8, 1944, 2 days after D-Day, the squadron attacked a railway tunnel near Saumur in France to stop German tanks moving toward Normandy. One tallboy did not hit the tunnel mouth. It punched through the hillside above and detonated deep inside the tunnel itself, around 60 feet down, bringing the roof down and sealing the line completely. The weapon had done exactly what Wallace promised. It had reached a target the enemy thought was untouchable by going through the earth. Now think about what that meant for the men on the receiving end. For years the Germans had been pouring concrete on a scale never seen before. Along the French coast they had built submarine pens with roofs up to around 7 meters thick, vast bomb-proof garages where U-boats sheltered between Atlantic patrols. They had built the rocket bunkers at Watten and Wizernes. They had built a secret site at Mimoyeke to house a battery of enormous guns aimed at London. Every one of these was designed around a single belief, that there was an upper limit to how much destruction a bomb could deliver to one spot, and that enough concrete would always exceed it. The earthquake bomb did not respect that belief, because it changed where the destruction was delivered. At Mimoyeki in July 1944, tallboys collapsed the gun shafts and galleries and the site was abandoned. At Wizernes, as we have seen, the dome survived but the ground beneath it did not, and the project was given up. These were not lucky hits. This was the design working as intended. A near miss that shattered the foundations could be as deadly as a direct strike. And then, on November 12, 1944, the principle claimed its most famous victim. The German battleship Tirpitz, sister of the Bismarck, had spent the war hiding in Norwegian fjords, tying down huge British naval forces simply by existing. Conventional attacks had failed for years. Then 6, 1, 7 and 9 squadrons came for her with tallboys. An earlier raid in September had already crippled her bow. This time, in clear weather near Tromsø, at least 2 tallboys struck home, and several more fell close alongside, heaving up the seabed beneath her. A magazine exploded. The great ship rolled over and capsized in minutes. Between roughly 900 and 1200 of her crew died. The Royal Air Force lost not a single aircraft. The tallboy had broken a battleship. But Wallace had never given up on his original dream of the 10-ton bomb, and in the last months of the war he finally got it. It was officially the 22,000-pound bomb. The crews called it the Grand Slam. It weighed close to 10 long tons, stood over 25 feet long, and carried more than 9,000 pounds of explosive in a casing so massive that the molten filling took nearly a month to cool and set. Ordinary Lancasters could not carry it. A special version was built, stripped of its gun turrets and armour and bomb doors, with stronger engines and a reinforced undercarriage, just to haul this single bomb into the sky. Its first target on March 14, 1945, was a railway viaduct at Bielefeld in Germany, a vital artery feeding the Ruhr. The Allies had attacked that viaduct again and again. More than 3,000 tons of ordinary bombs had been dropped on it, across dozens of raids, and still the trains ran. On one earlier occasion the Germans had repaired 17 hits within a day. Then a single Lancaster, flown by squadron leader Charles Calder, dropped one Grand Slam beside it from just under 12,000 feet. The earthquake effect tore the ground out from under the structure, and more than 100 yards of the viaducts simply collapsed. What thousands of tons of conventional bombing had failed to do, one bomb did by shaking the earth. The line stayed dead for the rest of the war. Which brings us to the last and grimmest proof. At Farge, near Bremen, the Germans had built a submarine factory called Valentin. It was a monster, over 400 metres long, with a concrete roof mostly 4.5 metres thick. Parts of it built up towards 7, raised by the forced labour of prisoners, many of whom died in its construction. It was meant to assemble U-boats in total safety. On March 27, 1945, 617 Squadron arrived with Grand Slams and tallboys. 2 Grand Slams pierced the 4.5 metre roof and exploded inside, bringing down around 1,000 tons of concrete into the assembly hall. Valentin never built a single submarine. So why could the German engineers not simply stop it? Because their entire science of protection was built on one assumption, that you defend against a bomb by standing in front of it. Thicker roofs, deeper walls, more concrete between the explosion and the thing you were guarding. The earthquake bomb did not attack the roof. It attacked the planet the roof was standing on. There was no straightforward way to armour against that, short of moving the foundations beyond the reach of the shock, and you cannot easily move a finished fortress. The contemporary German reactions that survive are revealing. At the submarine pens, they did not marvel at some mysterious superweapon. They calmly recommended adding still more concrete, a thicker bursting layer on top. They were answering the wrong question, just as Dornberger had at Wisseness. They kept defending the roof. The British had stopped aiming at it. Walter Dornberger is real, so is every site and ship in this account. Barnes-Wallis really did write down the earthquake principle in 1940, watch it ignored for 2 years, and live to see it sink a battleship and crush a submarine factory. Leonard Cheshire really did dive through flak to mark targets by eye. Charles Calder really did drop the first Grand Slam. The men who built the thickest walls in the world were not stupid, and they were not cowards. They had simply prepared, with enormous care, for the wrong kind of attack. There is something worth holding on to in that. The Germans had more concrete. They had brilliant fortress engineers and years to dig in. What they did not have was the one idea that mattered, the willingness to stop thinking about the wall and start thinking about the ground. Barnes-Wallis spent 2 years being told his idea was impossible. He was a quiet man who grieved deeply for the aircrew his weapon sent into danger. But he had seen something true about the physics of the world that no amount of reinforced concrete could argue with. A shockwave does not care how thick your roof is if you send it through the earth instead. If this is the kind of history you want, the real version, with the myth stripped out and the facts left standing, subscribe and stay for the next one. There are more of these stories than you would think. Quiet men with strange ideas, and the fortresses that learned too late that the idea was right.